Today we're diving into a scandal that really strikes at the very heart of medical science itself. We're talking about the case of Medipharma.
All right, let's just get straight to it. The core of this whole story is a simple but pretty shocking fact. A Japanese company, Medipharma, got caught red-handed faking the data from its clinical trials. And look, this wasn't just some small error or a little slip-up. This was intentional, systematic deception.
Now, to really get why this is such a massive deal, you have to know about something called GCP, or Good Clinical Practice. Think of it as the ultimate rulebook for every clinical trial, all over the world. Its whole point is to keep people safe and to make sure the data is rock solid and reliable. So when Medipharma broke these rules, they weren't just bending them, they were shattering the very foundation of medical research.
So, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What's really important to understand right away is that this whole mess wasn't about a dangerous drug that was actively hurting patients. The real issue, the core of the lie, was the corruption of the scientific data that was supposed to prove the drug was safe in the first place. So, who was this company, Medipharma? Well, they were a mid-sized player in Japan's pharma scene, running trials for all sorts of drugs and medical devices. And the fraud wasn't exposed by some brave whistleblower inside the company. Nope. It was actually discovered by Japan's Ministry of Health during what was supposed to be a pretty standard inspection. And that's when everything started to unravel.
So you're probably asking, how did they actually do it? I mean, what does faking data even look like in the real world? Well, it wasn't just one simple trick. It was a pretty sophisticated, multi-layered deception.
And what's really wild is just how methodical they were about it. First, they'd just go right into the patient reports and start changing things. You know, moving the dates a side effect showed up, or just bumping up an evaluation score to make the drug look a little better. Second, if there was a piece of data missing, instead of leaving it blank like you're supposed to, they just made something up and plugged it in. And third, they basically covered their own tracks by not keeping proper records of site audits, which made it impossible for anyone to do a real, honest check.
And this wasn't just one bad apple. This was a complete breakdown of the entire system. You had Medipharma's own staff in there, directly changing the numbers. You had the external company they hired to be the watchdog, the CRO, totally failing to check the records properly. And then at the top, you had the lead investigators, the doctors at the hospitals, who were relying on these cooked books without having any idea what was going on behind the scenes.
So this all leads to the big question, right? Why? Why would a company risk literally everything to do this? And, as it so often does, the answer really just comes down to pressure and, well, money.
It all starts with a simple truth. In the pharmaceutical industry, time is money, a lot of money. If you submit data that has gaps or problems, you're looking at delays, maybe even rejection, and your costs just keep going up. The shortcut? Well, you just correct the data yourself. That gets you to the market faster, you see a return on your investment quicker, and boom, higher profits, at least in the short term. They basically gambled their entire reputation for a quicker payday. And this quote just says it all. In their minds, this wasn't even fraud. It was a rational, short-term decision. It was a cold, calculated business move where profit and speed were way more important than scientific integrity.
So if the cover-up was so systematic, how in the world did they ever get caught? Well, the checks and balances in the system, they weren't perfect, clearly, but in the end, they did work.
It all started with a few whispers. Medical staff at the hospitals started noticing things in the data that just didn't quite add up. They raised the alarm, and that's what triggered the official inspection from Japan's Ministry of Health. Then, the investigators did the one thing Medipharma was praying no one would ever do. They took the original, raw patient files and put them side by side with the clean electronic data the company had submitted. The differences were obvious. The game was up. The fraud was confirmed.
And this is really where the story gets so much bigger than just one bad company. Because when something like this happens, the consequences create these massive ripples that spread out and affect the entire medical world.
So get this. Here's maybe the most crucial point of all. Amazingly, 0 patients were ever directly harmed by the drugs in these fake trials. And while that is a huge relief, it means the real damage wasn't to people's health. It was just something much more fragile. The real damage here was trust. Doctors and scientists have to be able to trust the data they're given. Their work depends on it. This scandal just blew a hole in that foundation. It also makes things harder and more expensive for regulators, who now have to be even more careful. And maybe, biggest of all, it really hurt the global reputation of Japan's entire clinical trial system.
But, there can be a silver lining. Every big crisis like this is also an opportunity to make things better. And the exposure of this failure really did force the system to get stronger.
Because in the wake of scandals just like this one, Japan passed something called the Clinical Trials Act in 2018. And this was a game changer. It forced companies to publicly register their trial plans from the start, to disclose any conflicts of interest, and most importantly, it strengthened the exact kind of original data checks that caught Medipharma in the first place. It was a direct response designed to make this kind of cheating way, way harder to get away with.
Which, at the end of the day, leaves us with a pretty tough question. The Medipharma scandal is proof that even with all the rules in the world, the incredible pressure of profit can corrupt science. It shows that a system built on trust needs constant, relentless verification. So when there are literally billions of dollars on the line, can our trust in the data ever be truly absolute?